Welcome. My name is Fadwa, and I'm a member of Sustainable Southbury, an environmental and conservation group located in Southbury, Connecticut. Our goal is to guide the town of Southbury to become a more green, sustainable community. We have quite a few initiatives going, one of which is education and outreach about food waste and reducing food waste. So in Connecticut, 20% of our trash that we haul from our transfer stations to another landfill or an incinerator is food waste. That's quite a bit of food waste. The average family in the United States, and we just bought 4 bags of groceries, can take one of those 4 bags and throw it in the garbage. Because that's what ends up happening with the food that we use. We end up throwing away 20% of our food. In the United States, from the food that we produce, the food that we grow, from farm to table, 40% of that food ends up in the trash. So between growing it, harvesting it, processing it, making it into other ingredients, distributing it to the grocery stores or food distributors, then our institutions like hospitals, schools, prisons, and then our homes and restaurants, 40% of that food is thrown away. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of waste. So hopefully this morning we'll be able to give you some hints to help your family reduce food waste. Okay, so I put away most of my groceries. So the first thing we're going to talk about is planning. Meal planning is a very important part of reducing food waste. If you understand what you're buying, you're not buying on impulse, you're planning your week, it's helpful in reducing your grocery bill and also reducing food waste. Now, I know most of you, have families or caregivers that are doing all that, but you can help. One of the ways you can help is to help put up a shopping list on the refrigerator. So when you finish off the bananas or the apples or that bag of cookies you had after school, you could write it down on the shopping list, which then helps your family buy the correct amount of food. Plans change. Your caregivers or your parents may be buying food thinking they're going to make dinner on certain nights of the week and something comes up and that doesn't happen. The next step is how to store the food, save the food for use at a later date. That's an important part. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about those dates on foods. What do they mean? Why is everybody throwing away food when they really don't have to? So back to planning. Yes, maybe you're not planning your meals, but you can help. One of the things we used to do as kids is to try to come up with recipes. Teenagers come up with recipes with the food that we had in the refrigerator. That was a lot harder back when I was a teenager, but it's easy today. So, for instance, the other day I had a bunch of potatoes and I had a cabbage. I had to use up that cabbage. It's been sitting in the refrigerator for a bit. So I had to use it up. So I typed into my Google search or whatever search box that you use, I typed in potato and cabbage recipe and it came up with 5 different recipes. Hey, I picked the one where I had most of the ingredients. Some of the ingredients I didn't have, I just substituted with other things. And I used up potatoes and I used up cabbage. So that's another way of helping save food. Type in what you have. It's really easy to stand at the refrigerator door and look and say there's nothing to eat. And that refrigerator is full of food. Get creative. Type in the ingredients that you have, type in the foods that you have, see what kind of recipes you can come up with. The other big thing about reducing food waste is leftovers. And leftovers would get a really bad rap. But if you do it correctly, leftovers can really help you out. One of the big things with the saving leftovers is If you have meat that needs to be cooled off and refrigerated, one good tip is if you have a thermometer, and these, can be fairly inexpensive. This is a meat thermometer that you use to see how cooked your meat is while you're cooking it. This is an instant read thermometer. It's digital. And when something that has meat in it, soup, gravy, meat itself, a casserole, it can't get below 140 degrees. Between 140 degrees and 70 degrees is when bacteria grows. So when it hits the 140 degrees, if it's a large amount, break it up into smaller portions, put it in containers and put it in your refrigerator. Okay? You can watch the tops of these containers get some condensation. You can take those, wipe them off so it doesn't spoil your food. You can then freeze them if you want after they've cooled off for a good day in your refrigerator. You could put them in the freezer if you wanted to. Labeling is a big helpful way to use up leftovers. Put a date on it. Use a Post-it note, use a piece of masking tape and a marker, and write the date and what it is on there. So when you open that refrigerator and you say there's nothing to eat, you know what's there because it's labeled. Also, too, if something goes way in the back of the refrigerator, you know what the date is. And quite frankly, it's going to be what it looks like, what it smells like to determine if it's still edible. So dating and labeling is very helpful with leftovers. Another way to reduce leftovers, there is a website called SaveTheFood.com, and they have a ton of information. One of the things they have is called Guesstimator. And what it helps you do is determine how much food to buy for the amount of people that you're feeding. So you go through their steps where you put in what meals what you're making, what the meat is or the protein is, what the vegetable is, exactly what you're making. And it'll tell you how much food to buy for the average serving and whether or not they're big eaters or light eaters. And speaking of that, we'll talk a little bit about portion size here too, because portion size is important. I'm sure you've heard that saying, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. We see something we really like and we pile it on our plate, but then we can't finish it. Well, that could be wasteful food. Restaurants tend to serve larger portions than what is recommended. So for instance, I have a dinner plate here from the 1940s. You see this middle here? How the size of that? Here's a dinner plate from today. Look how much bigger that is where you eat. So if we fill this up, there's a lot more food than if we fill this up. So that's something to pay attention to. And the United States Department of Agriculture has a website called myplate.gov, I believe it is. We'll have that listed at the end on portion sizes. So that will help you too reduce leftovers. But leftovers can be really good. So last night I had chicken and my potato and cabbage dish that I made, which was quite good, and another vegetable in a salad. And there was leftover chicken and potato and cabbage. So tonight is a liver and onion night, and I don't know about you, but that's not my thing. I'm not eating liver and onions. I'm going to have my leftover chicken and potato and cabbage and make myself a new salad. So think of leftovers that way. I mean, I'm sure every night of the week, your caregivers or your parents are not making everything that you like. You can save the leftovers from the stuff that you do like and heat them up and use them again. Reducing food waste. How about that? Okay. So we've talked about food waste. We've talked about planning our meals. Keeping a shopping list to help our caregivers or families buy the correct amount of groceries. I told you a little bit about SaveTheFood.com website with the guesstimator on, gives you quantities to buy for making food. I'm going to talk a little bit now about food storage and best if used by dates. So let's start with fruits and vegetables, okay? So I have a bowl here. I have a tomato, I have some apples, I have avocados, and I have bananas. Now, if I want to eat these all at once, I'll keep them in this bowl. If I don't, I'm going to separate them. And I'll tell you why. Ripe fruit that ripens emits ethylene gas. And ethylene gas makes other fruits and vegetables around it ripen also. So that it speeds up that whole process of ripening. So I'm sure you've seen tomatoes out on the counter or on the windowsill. If you grow your own, you can pick them green, put them on the windowsill, and they'll turn red. That's because they emit a lot of ethylene gas. And they actually taste better. They taste better when you have them out. But once they start to get ripe, which is just slightly soft, you need to put them in the refrigerator and away from other fruits and vegetables where the ethylene gas will affect. Now, SaveTheFood.com has a food storage section. And you can type in what food you have, what vegetables you have, what fruits you have, and it'll tell you the best way to store it. For instance, apples. Apples sitting out in a bowl like this are going to ripen really quickly. So if you're going to eat them right away, that's great. You know, you just bought them, you take them home, you eat them right away. But if you're not, it's best to put them in a bag, either a plastic bag with holes, a mesh bag, something that keeps some of the moisture in but doesn't let condensation form, and put them in your fruit and vegetable drawers in your refrigerator. Same thing with avocados. Avocados emit ethylene gas. You leave those out on the counter to get ripe. Now, if you're not going to use them right away and they're ripe, just beginning to get slightly soft to the touch, you can put them in the refrigerator. Again, in a bag with some holes in it. It's a plastic bag or a paper bag, so it doesn't release ethylene gas around everything else. And the same thing with bananas. I mean, bananas are not going to last really in the refrigerator. They're going to be out and they're going to get ripe. And of course, you're going to eat them before they get black. But if they do get black, they make great banana bread. So that's one way not to waste them. So that's just a little bit on some fruits and vegetables I had. Carrots, again, if you notice, when you buy a bag of carrots, by the time you get it home, it's warmed up. So if you put it in the refrigerator right away, there may be condensation collecting. It needs a little bit of moisture so that they don't get limp, but it doesn't need to be tightly wrapped. Now, if you do have carrots in your refrigerator in the drawer, and they do get very limp and soft, you can take them out, peel them, cut them up, and throw them in a bowl of cold water, and that will revive them. If you want to cut them up ahead of time, you can cut them up, leave them in a bowl of water, put your celery and your carrots in the bowl of water, and they won't get wilted, okay? I'm going to show you what I did with my celery here. Celery you don't tend to use often unless you just eat it by the stalk. So what I do and what SaveTheFood.com recommends is to have it with some moisture. And what I've done here is I've taken paper towel and I've dampened them. And I keep this bottom kind of damp. That's where the roots come from. And if you keep that kind of moist, they'll stay nice and firm instead of getting limp. Okay? Again, if they do get limp, peel them, cut them, drop them in a big bowl of cold water, and they'll revive. Now, herbs, my family uses a lot of parsley. I make that salad called tabbouleh, and I use it in soups. I use it a lot in everything, really, in salads. And I buy the celery, and I cut off the bottoms, and I put them in a jar of water, and I put them on the windowsill. Now, it'll go bad this way unless every other day you recut the bottoms a little bit and change the water. But these will last a long time. So any fresh herbs that you buy, like thyme and rosemary and parsley and cilantro, they'll all last a little longer if you keep them in a little bit of water, just like a cut flower. If you get a bouquet of cut flowers, if you continually trim off a little bit of the end and change the water, they'll stay fresh for a long time. Salad's another one. I'm sure some of you've seen these salads in these what they call clamshell containers. Well, you put this in your shopping cart, you finish your shopping. By the time you get home, it's at room temperature. You throw it in the refrigerator, and you'll notice there's condensation on the inside of the lid. Well, that's going to rot your lettuce. That's going to rot your greens. These are mixed greens, this particular package. So you take a paper towel, you wipe off that condensation, you put it back in the refrigerator upside down. So all the condensation now is being collected in this paper towel, and your greens are going to stay fresher longer. Now this date is 10 days old. This is 10 days past the best buy date. So we're going to talk about that best buy. So if it's 10 days after and it's still fresh, what's the secret? Well, it isn't really a big secret, but the fact is use by and best buy dates are only suggestions. They're the best guess from the manufacturer of the peak quality of their food. So that date on this clamshell of greens is when they think it's going to go bad. Or not bad, I take that back, not bad, is when it's past peak quality. But I bought it way before that date. I took it home, put the paper towel in there so it collected the moisture, and now it's still fresh. That's the same with canned goods, flour and cereals, all this stuff that you buy that says used by or best by. That is not a regulated date. That is a best guess by the processor of how long the food will be at peak quality. So if I have this can in my cabinet and it's 2 months after the best use by date, it's still good. Unless it's dented or damaged or kept in the car in hot weather or cold weather, if it's in your house, it is still good. So is this, as long as it's not open. This is cake flour. I could open this up well after the best use by date. It'll still be good. Now, once I open this, you have to be careful. You can't leave flour or cereals in your cabinet open for a long period of time and expect them to be great. But if they're not opened, they'll last. They'll last a lot longer than you think, because the only dates that are regulated by the federal government are baby formula and medications. A baby formula has an expiration date. After that date, it is no longer nutritionally good enough to feed to an infant. So that's why there's an expiration date on baby formula. And the other one is medications. Medications have an expiration date. It's usually a year. It could be less depending on the medication. After that date, you should not take it. You should dispose of it, and a hint, do not flush it down the toilet, okay? You can go to sustainablesouthbury.org and find out the best way to dispose of your old medications. So we talked about expiration dates. They're not regulated. It's a best guess. We talked about storing some fruits and vegetables. Again, savethefood.com. You're going to go to storage and you'll type in whether it's a fruit, vegetable, meat, and it'll tell you exactly the best way to store that item to last the longest in your refrigerator or in your cabinet or in your freezer. I'm going to talk just a little bit about freezing, and I'm not going to show you my freezer because it's not organized, but I know it's in there because everything's labeled and dated. The best way to freeze things and not have all those ice crystals get on them is to make sure it's good and cold before you put it in the freezer. So, for instance, I just put in the refrigerator a container of baked chicken. And I let it cool off on the counter until it was just about 140 degrees. Put it in a plastic container, and I put it in the refrigerator. Now I'm going to wait maybe till tomorrow. I'll open up that container, wipe off the condensation, because again, it was warmer than the refrigerator, so there's going to be condensation. Wipe off the condensation, put the lid back on that container well, label it on a piece of masking tape. We use masking tape here, with the date, and I'm going to put it in the freezer. And that way I won't get those extra ice crystals on my food, which can sometimes dilute it, make it taste funny. It's still good. The ice crystals don't make it bad. It's only your taste that will tell you if food is bad. It's your visual inspection, it's your taste, it's the smell of the food. It's not the date. Things can be in the freezer for 6 months, sometimes a year, depending on what it is. And it's still good, as long as you haven't lost electricity. Again, the food has to be at a fairly stable temperature in order to last its peak. So if it's in the refrigerator and it stays in there, that's great. If it's in the freezer, if it's room temperature, it'll last the longest that way. Okay, I think that's it. Talked a little bit about the ethylene gas. You don't want to mix those fruits and vegetables together because they'll all set themselves off and ripen too quickly. I want to talk a little bit about SaveTheFood.com because they have a great website. It's very reliable. It's easy to use. They have the Guesstimator app in there, which tells you how to figure out how much food to buy. It has the storage tips. It has recipe tips. I told you about, I frequently use the internet to find recipes. I don't think I've bought a recipe book in 10 years because I can find all the great recipes I need on the internet. I just have to type in what ingredients I already have to use up the food I have, and I can make a lot of things. But one last thing I'm not going to forget. I almost did, but I'm not going to. And that's dairy. Okay? Dairy is a little different too. Dairy has a sell-by date. So your milk, particularly your milk, has a sell-by date. That is not an expiration date. That just tells the store it's time to take it off the shelf and put in something new. That is the manufacturer's or the dairy's estimation of peak quality. So even if you bought it, 2, 3, 4, 5 days after the sell-by date, it doesn't mean it's bad because it hasn't been opened. Now, once it's opened, and please don't drink straight out of your milk cartons. Once it's opened, then you have about 7 days. Assuming that you're leaving it in the refrigerator, you're taking out, you're pouring from it, you're putting it back, you're not leaving it on the counter. Once you leave milk, cream on the counter, you've lessened its life because bacteria starts to grow. So that's the thing on milk. On cheese and yogurt, they really do have a long shelf life. Mainly because you haven't opened them. Once you open them again, you have to go by your smell, what it looks like, and possibly what it tastes like. If in doubt, obviously you're going to throw it out. But as long as I haven't opened this cheese, it's going to last quite a while, and it's going to last even past that best by date. Yogurt, the same thing. Yogurt's already sour milk, so it's going to last a little longer also. But again, once you open it, then you really need to watch and pay attention. Maybe even date the container because you really don't want it past 7 days in your refrigerator once it's been opened. And I'm putting this back in here because I don't want my dairy to go bad. So I think I've covered everything. I hope you have a lot of questions, which we will answer for you. We'll be live. We'll be able to answer that for you. And we'll give you some other websites for hints to help you not waste food.